Well, hello there, everyone. Here to show you the connections that are related to culling activity right here, and basically that you see right here is I went ahead and drew some pictures right here. Say it's like which calls like a it could be like a man, a woman, like boy and girl. It is, and basically that the way I went and drew this right here of talking about if most of us are if we're taking any type of class such as for like for English class or if, talking about the sentence fragment, and basically though that. Normally that with most English classes that they would usually say is like don't actually draw the pictures though. It's like if it's talking about pronouns or verbs or anything like that, like for particular vocabulary that knowing about that with this activity right here is what I'm talking about is knowing about like that they usually go by say words by saying those that it or she's or something like that she's she's going she'll be going to the to the library or something like that, but or he's going to be going to the library, he's going to be going for a walk, he'll be going for the walk, and then so of course put in quotations it is. But on the other hand, that knowing about that that you have right here is I went ahead and drew these pictures here, and now I'll go ahead and work right here like the same the 4B pencil it is, and basically that talk about this with these drawings right here, and basically that if most of us like especially I would think about like you have these these relationships like which call like between related it's like if you're like whenever you meet people around community or maybe around town, something like that. Talk about friendship, relationship, or it could be family related. And a lot of times, though, we kind of wonder though that from it could be maybe a few years or something like that that you run into people and knowing about that knowing about what is the relationship from this person to that person, and they usually say is like going by saying it's like to make the long story short, but don't know if ever understand and knowing about. I'm like that with the son or daughter, I'm like goes by saying I'll go and use the charcoal pencil right here is, but let's just say if this was a daughter or a cousin, and then they go out and have children. I'm like they go out, they have kids and. And then I sometimes go by saying it's like and then whenever the kid grows up, and then they go out and they get married, and then they go in and have children, and then they go ahead and then whenever they grow up, and then they have children, stuff like that. But all goes by what it calls like kind of like family tree though, is that knowing about that with these. If it's family and friend relatives, is knowing about them like that at the time that we wonder though that that if we're gonna be with like if we're gonna be talking or seeing somebody, and the next thing you know, I'm like that they go by a different last name. I'm like that this person is actually they're not the biological cousin, they're not the biological family member. They're actually they're the stepdaughter or the stepsister, or they are the half sister or half daughter, something like that. And basically, that let's just say if the girl, that she grows up and then that she has a kid. Let's just say she has a daughter, and then the boy grows up and then he he has a son. He gets married and then they have a son. And basically, whenever everybody all meets up, and then that they go by different last names, and like anybody that may wonder though, they have that rule saying is like that whenever the spouse they get married, and then that they gotta go by what says like between biological between that the maiden name, and then knowing about like from the maiden name, and then more likely they say that that's the name that you have from original before you got married, etc., etc. But let's just say that if I can go ahead and use this right here, it's like for most of the time with most sentence fragments, though that they usually say that to try to say the words that mean pictures. I'm like, instead of me drawing the picture though, that just drawing some pictures right here just for us to kind of understand. And I'm like, yeah, if I want to be creative, it is. But on the other hand, that they usually say is like, if you could go ahead and try to tell a story, and then that may be used by, you say, for sentence fragment of knowing about, that the little boy and then the little girl, if they would you cause like, they were working puzzles together, or they were doing that, they playing games together, they were crawling around, or something like that. I'm like talking about that type of action activities. And anybody that may wonder though, that I'm like, yeah, whenever you have these two kids, and like with anybody that especially I would think that I'm like, really, that there more likely is a difference between these two kids right here, knowing about, I'm like, that they were born and raised with this connection of the family, but then on the other hand too, that knowing about one of them that don't like Legos, one of them that likes Legos, one of them that actually likes which they perform in, actresses and actors, something like that. One of them that's into computers, and one of them that's into makeup. Let's just say that with most kids, let's just say maybe finger paint. I'm like, one of them that likes the finger paint, and the other one don't like the finger paint. But on your hand, that knowing about that, we have these two people I went ahead and drew right here, is like, say, for diagrams, and like for examples of for like talking about with these connections. And from like if you have a boy and a girl, and knowing about, I'm like, yeah, that they were born and raised as a certain person of the family, and half time you wonder though, does it go back to nearly 20 years from family history? I'm like, for family and friend history, and knowing about that, yeah, somebody that knows you from somehow, and then they walk up to you and ask, how's it going? I'm like, yeah, I'm the son or daughter of one of your best friends, from back in the early from back in the early 1970s, something like that. I'm the son or daughter of your computer lab partner from back in the early 80s, or something like that, from a job. I'm like anybody that may say that, that they may call it not related, but on the other hand too, that they may say that, well, that there is a type of relationship to talk about with friendship, ain't there? Like, and talk about, you may not be related to this person, because it's like, this person is the son or daughter of this other person, of this co-worker. You used to work at them at the lab, or maybe at the factory, or if it was anything that was related to social work, stuff like that. And like with anybody that may wonder though, that do you really call that a relationship? Like, so far as if you're related to them, that you had the same last name, or if you had the same blood. I'm like, anybody may wonder though, if you had two different blood types, it is. And I'm like, yeah, don't got the same blood type, but then you're still related. I'm like, you were, if you were not raised together, but then on the other hand too, that you were raised by this person, that this person who had a kid, and then they grew up, and then I'm like, yeah, that like most people, especially I would think that kind of goes back. It's like knowing about. I'm like, yeah, it's to make the long story short, I'm knowing about. I'm like, yeah, that's the son or daughter of the half uncle or half sister, or the biological parent of whenever they were connected. And then of course they had a kid, and then the kid grows up, and then they go out, and then whenever they grow up, and then they meet somebody, and then they have a family of their own, etc., etc. Anybody that may wonder though, that the family tree kind of goes on to about whenever the kid grows up, and then they go out and have a kid, and and they go ahead and have a kid, and then they start a family of their own with about maybe 4 kids, 4 children, and then they run into old family and friend relatives. And anybody that may wonder though, I'm like, yeah, that talking about that. Well, not really related, but on their hand, that knowing about, I'm like, yeah, that what basically the whole matter is that they knew each other at some point. But the way I think about it, though, is that with most of the time that working right here is a drawing, but let's just say that talk about, say, for sentence fragment that. And that according to my understanding, which I know that more likely they usually say that really that you try to express the picture, describe the picture by the saying, not by the drawing. So it's like if I were to be like, say, draw here, kind of looks like a clown, but I'm like, yeah, I'm just at this the son or daughter, if they were to grow up and then they were to have a kid, and then I'm like, yeah, draw a few examples right here. I'm like, I'm like, trying to do some work right here, with this person right here. I'm like, they go out and have a kid, and then they grow up, something like that. But they grow up, and then let's just say if this side of the family right here, they go ahead and have a kid, and I can go ahead and use right here as this 2B pencil right here. They have a kid, but really about this whole thing about family connections, though, if it's really all about, really about the family gets bigger. I'm like, about every 3 years or so that I guess the family's going to get bigger, and just knowing about, that if there is a real big difference, and I'm sure they probably say that, well, you're not really related, because knowing about, this person is actually the step sister or the step brother or the step cousin or the half cousin or half brother or sister of this person, and then their connection goes by way back. I'm knowing about from the early from 1987 something like that, to where that they go out and they have a kid, and then they grow up, and then they you start talking, and then it's like, yeah, that knowing about, I'm like, how is it that these two are related? And knowing about, I'm like, that they each have they have different they go by different last names, and on the other hand too, that they only know each other in some connections, that they say that that they no, they remember you from saying that they used to, their mom or dad used to work at their parents, whoever that used to work at the computer lab, or maybe somewhere, some research company or something like that. That's how they met, and that knowing about that they had a kid, and that just knowing about, I'm like, yeah, that these two, man and woman, who actually who think that they look at each other as like what you call best friends, or brother and sister, or if it's a cousins or whoever, that knowing about, like, what is the connection between these two. And like anybody that may wonder, though, that I'm like, yeah, that just because I'm like that they go by different names, is knowing about how is it that that this connection right here is possible, because knowing about, I'm like, yeah, that if the names seem to be quite different from everything, I'm like, yeah, that they if they went by a different last name, they always went by that particular name compared to the other person's name, and half the time, like, wondering about what is the relationship with these two. And the way I think about it, though, is that more likely it could be a long story, and most of the time that most stories, they probably say it's so long to where that really, I'm like, that some people that may say that don't really want to talk about it, but I'm like, yeah, that according to my opinion, though, the way I think about it, though, is that knowing about, I'm like, really about these two people who more likely that may not be related, knowing about the type of connection that they could have, is knowing about if they had the same interests, is knowing about that they both like they both like working with kids, they both like working puzzles, they both like computers, or they both like studying. Think about a relationship between them, and knowing about, really, I'm like, that there's they're not related in any way, of knowing about that they go by the last names, the same last names, or like the special connection, like the certain connection in a family goes. But on the other hand, too, that knowing about, I'm like, yeah, that I'm sure we could probably say you can't really get through life and knowing about that, really about knowing about, they let you down because, you don't go by the same last name, you're not even related, you're not part of the group, etc., etc. But the way I think about it, though, is knowing about, I'm like, yeah, that they kind of getting the chance to know this person is just by saying, I'm like, find something that more likely that maybe that is related, and knowing about, I'm like, if you're both are interested in about the similar things, I'm like, yeah, that you're both are good at telling stories and writing your own stories, solving problems. I'm like, I'm sure anybody will probably say that there's a type of relationship from knowing about the work, about the similar work of talking about that this person right here, that they met you at the lab, they are actually your lab partner. I'm the cousin of that person, or I'm the person who used to talk to you maybe at the coffee shop, something like that. And for the most part, the way I would think about, though, is that really about that it seems like it's a story to where that I don't know if I would even ever understand it, knowing about, I'm like, yeah, you had these two man and woman right here, boy and girl, and then knowing about whenever they grow up and then they realize it's like that they could have a lot more brothers and sisters and cousins than what they thought they had. Anybody that may wonder, though, especially I wonder, though, that I'm like, yeah, that is a family tree supposed to get smaller? I hear it's supposed to get bigger. I know about after the son or daughter they grow up and then they have children, and that knowing about, I'm like, yeah, that their children that may be go by different last names, and maybe they may go by the same name, and let's just say that really about that that they're not related, but on the other hand too, that the way that we may look at each other is knowing about, Mike, really, I'm like, if we're related or if we're not related, and knowing about how close we are as like what you call for like true friends, true connections, that type of stuff. But on the other hand, and knowing about, I'm like, yeah, that anybody that may wonder about the what you call it, the sentence fragment, I know about is that if we were to go by saying is something like he and she, and like say for like say apostrophe, it's like a quotation, he and she not related, not related. But like, and then some people that may think I'm like the way I usually would say is like go by so far as a sentence for the second sentence it is, and go by saying, but they both spend equal time together. Equal time together. And really, I'm like, the whole purpose about, about together, and anybody that may wonder, though, I'm like, yeah, well, together, they're not your biological, cousin or whoever, and half the time it seems like that the way I would think about, though, that I'm like, yeah, that there may be a lot of things in common, and knowing about they're both good at math. There may be some people out there that may not be very good at that, maybe pronouncing and reading, like what's called vocabulary words, stuff like that, storytelling. And there may be these two groups of people, like maybe a group of 4 boys and maybe 3 girls, something like that. I might get them all together in groups, and just knowing about, I'm like, yeah, that you could have somebody related to you in that group, or like talk about to develop kind of like a relationship of knowing about, I'm like, yeah, that some like I keep thinking about that yeah, that one of these children, of course, it's like talking about, I'm like, yeah, that we could be related, but that we may not know about it. I'm like, yeah, that talking about, yeah, that they are the grandson, they are the great grandson or something like that. Yeah, they're a little junior of your oldest uncle's son, or something like that. I'm like knowing about. I'm like, yeah, that. Then they may not be related as like what you call as like for family members though, but then on the other hand too, that let's just say that from how they met and then what they did together, what they learned together, and at the time, if so by goes far as that so-called question, knowing about if the question goes by saying is that if it's possible, knowing about can I'll just say can boy and girl can boy and girl have a related connection, related connection even if they were not raised together. And anybody that may wonder, though, I'm like, yeah, that talking about if you were to like say to do the form of shape of I can maybe go ahead and use maybe besides a tie, I can go ahead and maybe like if you say call me a quotation something like that, quotation marks, and knowing about my yeah, can these two different people right here, could they more likely be related? I'm like, do they have a special connection, even though if that they were not raised together? And like I guess we can also look at it as like with these two different quotations. Let's just say what between periods and commas, periods and commas, parentheses. I'm like, are these words of language related? Even though if we may open up a program such as Word or Processor or Illustrator, we may come up to these exact similar quotation marks or something like that on like Word, Microsoft Word or Office or Outlook Express that may look about the same, but then they have different colors and then they go by different controls. Knowing about, are these two different course of foreign English related, are they related, even though they may mean about the same thing, but then on the other hand too, do they come from the same group, do they come from the same related family? And I guess more likely they say that yes and no, but on the other hand, and knowing about the whole connections related, and knowing about they basically mean about the same thing, but on the other hand, that one of them could have been produced, one of them could have been developed by another company. And like anybody per se, like memory cards are memory cards, calculators are calculators. And let's say with Texas Instrument, and let's just say that there's another kind of calculator that looks just like this one right here, but then on the other hand too, the controls are just a little bit different. But then on the other hand too, that with the calculator right here, that you can't do graphing on this one, on a one similar to this one right here. This one right here, tracing, graphing, zooming, like that pull up apps, download games, etc., etc. But then if there's another calculator, maybe almost like this one right here, to where maybe just a little bit bigger screen, and then where you can do a number of things that may not be very similar either. And just knowing about, I'm like, yeah, you can do both math with them and maybe a little bit of science, but with graphing and stuff like that. But on the other hand too, that knowing about how is it that it's related. And anybody that may wonder, though, it's not related, because one of them is made by Texas Instrument, or it is, and the other one is made by particular Tecon or something, particular Tecon. But they may say that one one of them is made in like parts of a Vermont or something like that, and the other one was made. They're both made here in the USA. They're both made here in the United States, but on the other hand too, that they were produced by different companies. Anybody, we can maybe think about like that's how it works usually. Whenever a car make comes around the corner, and with the car make. This car is not related to this, that they go by the same name. Let's just say I can go ahead and pick maybe maybe like a Toyota Camry or maybe the Dodge Caravan as maybe an example. There's like another model of a Dodge Caravan, but then they may say that car right there is a newer model. But let's just say if they're both about the similar models, from the Dodge Caravan, but then on the other hand too, one of them, of course, it gets better gas mileage, or the other one has leather seats, but then the other one has like what's the co-folding or something like that seats, or one of them that has better power steering control than the other. What is the difference? Even though if they were made by both of them were made from the same dealer, from the same car lot, but then on the other hand too, with this Dodge Caravan, that anybody say that only maybe a certain licensed driver can drive it, stuff like that. But on the other hand, talk about say for connections related and knowing about using pictures as an example of like what you call using pictures for like so far saying is like from how a man and woman from how they can be related even though if they don't go by the same last name, even though if they haven't seen each other in years, etc., etc. That it seems like that there's always some type of question to where you don't know products, you don't know people, just because it's like, yep, you never met them, or you don't think that they're related, they don't have the same blood type, they don't have, you're not familiar with that side of the family, etc., etc. But just that type of connection and knowing about, from knowing about each person more likely has something similar, such as they're both good at something, and more likely that knowing about is like, good by the thought. But on the hand, that knowing about, besides, it's like you say, go on and on with the story, but other than that, like talk about that, besides going on with the point, I like talking about, it's like we say with the goldfish, with the goldfish, and I can maybe draw an example of, say, of a goldfish too, but let's just say that I like talking about, you say for sentence fragment, I can tell anybody here that, especially like from one of those cartoons, is knowing about, that a lot of times that I heard about sentence fragment, if most of us have seen, the TV show The Simpsons, that that type of language is what I've heard, talk about for sentence fragment, but that the type of English class that more likely that we may take later on, we may wonder though that that we it seems a lot confusing. It's much harder than the classes that we took whenever we were much younger, earlier. But then you may meet somebody that may say that, well, they actually that they're good at working with kids too. That they got a daycare center, or that they're working at the library. I'm like anybody think about these two people that they both like reading books, and I can go ahead and use right here is red and the blue right here. Both. If it's boy and girl, man or woman, that more likely that they both spend a lot of time at the library, but then on the other hand too, that they go by what you call difference in last names. They both were raised, with different parents, or different, uncles, whichever it is. At the time, like wondering, that I'm like, that if it goes by the so-called question is like, are they related? Even though if they spend a lot of time together, they spend a lot of time together, and that knowing about, I'm like, that I guess some like way I would think about though is that knowing about is agreeing about knowing about this person who is from another country. I'm like, this person who's from another country. they're not, that more likely they're not going to be related, because on the other hand too, that knowing about, if they are saying that they are from South Korea and then they're here and then they come here to America to learn about stem cell research, or that they're from Australia, their parents are from Australia. Let's just say if their parents are from Australia, and then that the son or daughter, they have a kid, and their son or daughter has lived here, has lived in the has lived in the United States for at least 15 years, and then that they're in school, and that they're working on a, let's say whenever they graduate, they're looking on getting their masters, or they're working on getting their bachelor's, to say their degree in communication, or if it's science or chemistry, and just knowing about that they say that that they're originally from another country, but then they say that if they were born here in the United States, but then that their parents were born in Australia. And a lot of times anybody may wonder, though, I'm like, really? I'm like, what is the difference? And knowing about, but the way I would think about, though, is that if the story goes by saying, it's like that with the connection zone, that if the requirements go by saying, it's like that, that if you get along with this person very well, you spend equal time with them, then more likely there's very much a connection. And I don't know, anybody that may disagree too, that knowing about, that, only if they were raised, if you and her, or you and him, these two people who were raised with the same parents, they were raised in the same family, they were raised, in the same town, district, they both drove the same cars, etc., etc., knowing about, the connections related. Are they still related, no matter if they were born, and raised with these two couples, two parents that go by, say, different last names? And but the way I would think about, though, is knowing about, like anybody would go by saying, is like talk about, say, for the connections, is knowing about from how it's connected, and knowing about, I'm like, as all I'm saying, for we can all, and we'll get along just fine, and just knowing about, just find something that more likely that we both more likely agree with, and knowing about, I'm like, this person's good at this, well, so am I, I'm good at this as well, like, well, let's share our thoughts, let's share this or share that, but on the other hand, too, I'll talk safe with the connections related collectivity. Well, hello there, everyone, and like you right here is talk about, say, where connections related, and the way I would think about it, though, is that both man and woman, I'm like, that your boy and girl, would, that more likely that we may, that that they may say that they got their connection somehow, is knowing about from how they met, and then and knowing about for who they hear about, knowing about this person right here is good at this. They find them maybe on any social media sites, something like that. But on the other hand, too, knowing about, I'm like, really about that, that these two pairs, groups of maybe 3 or 4 people, or 3 or 4 kids, they may not be related, but on the other hand, too, of talk about is developing a relationship of, I like to say, a relationship was like with the group, and knowing about get to know each other, and knowing about what you're good at. And like anybody, especially with the way I would think about, though, is that with most of the time, that if you're not going to be related to somebody, I'm like, different last names, and then on the other hand too, that they were born and raised in the same town, in the same city, in the same state, but then on the other hand too, that they were raised with different parents, or different uncles, or which these two couples that that they have a kid, and then they're raised, they raise them, and they grow up, and then they go out and have kids, and then you meet somebody, you spend equal time with them, and knowing about, I'm like, that we don't have the same blood type, we don't have the same last name, how is it that we are related? And then I'm like, it goes by so-called saying, is knowing about the connections of knowing about that it's possible we could be related, just by knowing about, we were in class together, we worked together at the lab, we did this together, we did that together, and anybody may wonder, like, well, that's not really a relationship, that's more likely a connection, but it's like connection to community. But the way I would think about, though, is that if these two, people that were neighbors at one time, they grew up in the same town, but then they say that they seen each other a lot of times. I'm like that they went to the fairs together, they went to the carnivals together, and they both shared. You say they both like eating cotton candy together. You know, they both like watching the festivals. I'm like that they both like watching the games on TV together. You know, that type of stuff. And anybody that might wonder about, you know, the so-far's connection of knowing about, you know, how well we get along, you know, how these people, groups of people get along together, knowing about the whole part about, you know, between the connections related, and knowing about, like, yeah, that, you know, if we can really understand about the whole story, about knowing about that we go by different, you know, last names, and if that story could ever be explained or maybe understood, but on the other hand too, to knowing about it seems like that there was always some type of story of talking about between the first and then the second, and then the third or junior or senior, but on the hand and knowing about, like, yeah, that knowing about the things that more likely we can do together and just like say develop a relationship. We're talking about right here, I talk about say for the connections related, I say collectivity.